Welcome back to Fuel Up Classic. Now, regular viewers of the channel may well recognise this car. This is my 1985 Jaguar XJ6 Series 3. It's a 4.2 straight 6, this one. It's not the big V12. But it's a car that I have owned twice throughout my lifetime. I've had to consult my notebook and look back on dates, but I first bought this car back in 2012. I was 21 years of age, I was a university student, and it cost me my entire amount of my yearly student loan to buy this car. There was a very good reason for it at the time. I've alluded before that I have a very personal connection to this car to do with my father. But nonetheless, I've owned it for a long time. I sold it, I bought it back at the tail end of last year because I always regretted selling it the first time round. And it's now very much a keeper. But there's some things to use and improve on this car, that's for sure. It's not perfect. But I thought it actually gives the perfect opportunity to deep dive into a Series 3 XJ6. And so much of what will be in this video will be relevant to a Series 1, a Series 2 and a Series 3. Those original incarnations of the XJ is probably the best way to summarise them all. And for further reference, this video will also feature a late Daimler Double Six Series 3, so you can get to grips with all different variations of the Jaguar and Daimler lineup and their shared common issues to look out for. Buy a properly good XJ of this era, and I still think they're one of the finest luxury cars ever made. Buy a bad one, and it will leave a sour taste in your mouth that will put you off for good. And I just hope if this video does one thing, it helps you in your pursuit of buying one yourself. They really are brilliant, but there are some key things to look out for before you part with your cash. Now, the early to mid-1960s, Jaguar had a huge amount of models on offer. Just off the top of my head, I mean, you've got things like the Mark II Jaguar, but within that you had the 2.4, the 340, the 3.8, the 420 Saloon, the Mark X, the 420G, and I don't think I've named them all. There would have been the S-Type in there as well, and that was just their saloon lineup. So, understandably, Jaguar needed to redefine things, streamline it all down to one flagship saloon model. And in 1968, you saw the debut of the Series 1 XJ6. Now, throughout its lifespan, the series cars had 3 iterations, and they really did have some quite significant differences between them, even if the styling is very, very similar all the way through. But what you basically need to know with a Series 3 came out in 1979, and somewhat unbelievably, in 6-cylinder format, it ran until 1986. But with that big old V12, it ran all the way through until the early 1990s. That's a huge production run. If you think overall, Series 1 cars, which is what this car shares its underpinnings and its engine with, and a number of other parts, debuted in 1968, and they were still putting those bits well into the late 80s and early 90s into a car. That's remarkable, and it's a testament to how well engineered and how truly superb these cars can be, as long as you bag a good one. But with the XJ6 Series 3, there were some changes, a huge update. Basically, behind the scenes, Jaguar were working on an all-new model, but it was nowhere near ready. So they had to give the old Series XJ another lease of life. And for the first time in the company's history, they outsourced the styling. But they didn't just go to anybody, they went to one of the best names in the business, Pininfarina. Now, that's a name synonymous with some fantastically styled cars, so it was in safe hands, that's for sure. But the XJ6 Series 3 was really quite radically redesigned compared to its predecessors. It might not look like it on first glance, but believe me, it is. You've got a different front end, you've got a different roofline, more glass for an area cabin, things like these flush door handles, different bumpers that had to be brought in due to safety regulations. All subtle differences, but actually they add up to a huge overall package that's changed quite a lot compared to its predecessors. But of course, you've still got the old legendary XK 6-cylinder engine, but for the first time, it's fuel injected with the Series 3. And that means this is the most economical of any series car, although the economy by today's standards is still a little bit laughable. But it's also probably the most refined of any series XJ as well. So the first thing you want to be looking at when you go and view hopefully several different examples to give you the best overview of which is a good one, which is a bad one, is you just want to be looking all around the bodywork, and by that I mean top to bottom, because a Series XJ will rust spectacularly in all the places you can see and all the places you can't see as well. But starting at the front, start at the business end of things. This lovely, synonymous with Jaguar, 4 headlights, lovely bulged wings, and a big long bonnet and plenty of chrome work is fantastic looking. But it does mean this flat front is very susceptible to stone chips. And what happens is those stone chips get left, corrosion sets in around here. And I have seen Jaguars of this era with the entire front wings around here completely rotted out. That's how much it can be a problem. Now, a few stone chips is no issue. Get on top of them, address them as you see them, you should have no problems. But when there's several, bubbling has started, corrosion has set in, probably behind the headlights as well, and all in here, then you're going to have bigger issues. It's expensive to put right. Replacement wings are a lot of money now. Also, whilst you're down there, have a good look round the car. There's more chrome than you think, especially earlier cars, Series 1 and 2's, chrome bumpers, that sort of thing. Check the condition of the chrome. We all know how expensive that is these days to have done properly. So you want to make sure that it's in good condition, free from dents. They are very exposed out there on the earlier cars, so little parking dents and things like that over the years are very common. Series 3 cars do fare better because they have these safety bumpers, but nonetheless you want to have a good look there, and whilst you're there, front and back, get underneath, whilst you're checking for oil leaks and that sort of thing, as you should. Most of these cars will drip a little bit of oil, by the way, but the front valance and the rear valance are known rot traps as well. They pick up all the road debris, all the dirt, hold it in there, rot out, and of course you don't often see it, so it's hiding. So whilst you're taking the opportunity, have a good look round front and back. But another known rust trap is around both the front and rear windscreens. All the way around, run your fingers, check for bubbles in the paint. And the very, very common area is down here where the windscreen meets the scuttle panel. It's basically the water sits in this seal here over the years. That seal starts to become a little bit porous. Moisture gets in behind, and the problem is you usually can't spot it until there's bubbling all around the bottom here. And by that point it's too late, because the moisture has got in from the inside and rotted it from the inside out. So it's only when you have the windscreen taken out, which by the way, these are bonded in, not the easiest job to do you really reveal the full extent of the corrosion. And to repair it properly, you've got to cut all of this out and weld new metal in, and obviously then have it painted and then have your screen put back in. Not a cheap job, and that goes for both the front and rear screens. The wheel arches, especially the rear arches, will rot out as well. Run your hands up and inside the rim. Feel for any blisters, any bubbling, any signs of filler. There'll be a nice clear line when you run your finger around the edge of the wheel arches. Mine have just started to get a little bit of bubbling on them, and I know I need to get that addressed, because what will happen is it will take over in no time at all, and before you know, you're looking at cutting that all out, new arches welded in, or worse still, there's a lot of people that would just fill them full of filler, paint over it, and it's somebody else's problem in a year or two's time. So rust, if you're not picking up on it already, is the biggest issue. If you can get the car up in the air, please do. It gives you a whole other viewpoint of what's going on. Sills, quite a complicated sill arrangement on a Series XJ, not cheap to put right properly, and floor pans as well will rust out. You have to remember, these are from an era where rust prevention from the factory didn't really happen. And they were kind of treated as throwaway cars for a long time. They were cheap, they weren't maintained to the standard that they should be. So you've got to try and bag a good one. Moving on into the interiors, well, they do actually tend to fare really rather well. They're not built like a Germanic Mercedes of the era or even a BMW, that's for sure. And some of the switchgear will be a little bit flimsy, but they do have a charm all of their own. But on the whole, you're just looking for wear in the leather, check the carpets, pull the carpets up, obviously, as you're also looking at the floor pans as well at the same time. Make sure everything electrical works. These are prone to electrical gremlins, and 9 times out of 10 that is because a car is not used regularly. The windows can get very slow, the air conditioning system can pack up because it's now 40, 50 plus years old in some cases. Jaguar headlining that always drops. It's something that they always did. I don't know why. Well, I do. Basically the glue comes undone and they drop, and it's before you know it, it's almost resting on top of your head. Look out for one that's been pinned back up. There's plenty of aftermarket options. This one has had an updated headlining put in it about 5 years ago. All I can say is 5 years in, it hasn't dropped yet. But who knows, with time may tell. I ended up doing that job myself. Not an easy one. I probably wouldn't do it again. But in general, the interiors fare well. And even a worn XJ will be a lovely place to spend time behind the wheel. Mechanically, well, we could be here all day. There's lots of ifs and buts of what could go wrong, but the Jaguar XK engine was very long-lived. It had a very healthy life in both racing, and it was in their saloon cars, their sports cars. So it's very, very well served in terms of parts and knowledge out there in order to rebuild them and keep them running exactly as they should. That is still an engine that shares its beating heart with an E-Type Jaguar, and some even more expensive Jaguar models than that. So don't be too alarmed at the idea of an engine rebuild coming in at circa probably £7,000 for one of these. And when you're talking about a £100,000 E-Type, that's a kind of easy pill to swallow. When you're talking about a perhaps £10,000 or £15,000 XJ, becomes a little bit more tricky. Hence now you're seeing the reason why so many of these cars have found their way to the scrap heap. They do need proper maintenance and it costs money. Gearbox options wise, well, you could have a Series 3 with a 5-speed manual. They're very rare. The vast majority, and by that I mean probably 95% plus, will be 3-speed automatics. Silky smooth, really. This one's been reconditioned about 12,000 miles ago, looking at the history. So, Borg-Warner 66, strong box, a little bit agricultural probably by modern standards, but you will notice out on the motorway a 4th gear would be nice. We're still harking back to a 3-speed transmission here. Keeps the revs a little bit higher than perhaps you'd like, but nonetheless, the slow nature of it all kind of suits the relaxed nature of the car. You have, of course, got the famous Jaguar IRS rear suspension setup. Really impressive setup, so well engineered, but there are certain things in which, say, when you need to replace the rear brakes, it's quite an involved job. Don't forget they're inboard discs and pads and calipers, so you've got to drop the entire rear frame. A mechanic that works on these cars will think nothing of it. To somebody who's used to a normal setup, it can be a little bit of a shock. And usually the way that things grow in terms of bills when it comes to the rear suspension, and I've also fallen victim to this in the past, is you think you're going in there and dropping the rear IRS to replace the discs and pads, but you realise once you're in there, you might as well overhaul the whole lot. So it ends up being a suspension rebuild. There's lots of bushes and everything else to give it the world's best ride, but at the same time, you're going to see bills mount and mount and mount. Access is easy when everything's out, so you might as well do it whilst you're in there. So up until now, I haven't really spoken about the V12 option that you can get with one of these cars. It doesn't matter what series of XJ you go for, they were all available with a V12. And they are a wonderful car to own. I think a lot of people are scared by them. You can pop open the bonnet of a V12 XJ and it can really be quite intimidating. There's a lot going on in that engine bay. They do need specialist attention. They need to be kept on top of, but on the whole, a properly maintained V12 is a magnificent car to own. I did a video a year or two ago, right back in the early days of the channel, on a Daimler Double Six Series 3. So by all means, go back and watch that. I'll try and put a link somewhere in this video so you can go back and watch that. Now, prices have risen substantially over recent years for good XJ Jaguars, but they still get an awful lot of car for your money. And that can be true of no matter what version you buy, whether it be a V12 Series 1, which by far the most desirable of all of the Jaguar XJ lineup, and they will command the biggest prices because they're incredibly rare and they are very sought after. But a good Series 3 like this, an XJ6 4.2, probably around the £10,000 mark. 15,000 is probably for the very, very best. £5,000 will get you an okay, hopefully solid base to start with. But as I'm sure you appreciate, buying the very best you can afford is the cheaper option, usually always in the long run. But somewhere around that price mark, 10 to £15,000. I believe prices in the States now of these have really firmed up. They used to be cheap as anything, but I think they command a little bit more money than that now over there for a really good example. So that's interesting to see. And it's also a sign that this car is coming into its own. It's starting to develop a little bit of a following, a different kind of clientele, and people are going to pay more money for them. Series 1 cars will inevitably be the most desirable, and probably, again, about 15,000 gets you behind the wheel of a usable, decent example. 25,000 is going to hopefully get you a very, very good one, perhaps something like a manual overdrive one, a rare beast, somewhere around that sort of money. Series 2s, very interesting. For the longest time, a car that was sort of snubbed a little bit in the XJ lineup, came from the dark days of Jaguar and British Leyland, and got a little bit of an unfair reputation for the build quality, which, let's be honest, was never fantastic. But the Series 2 was always seen as the one that lacked that overall quality for a variety of different reasons, mostly political with what was going on with Jaguar at the time. But it's funny how times change things, and these days there are still a number of Series 2s that have survived, and they have really come into their own as a proper classic car. People that prefer the earlier, possibly even you could say, more elegant lines of the earlier series cars before things like the safety regulations and the Pininfarina redesign of the Series 3. So you're probably looking at somewhere around the £8,000 to £9,000 will get you into a straight 6 version driver, a good solid basis, but double that for something that's truly really good. And if you wanted to go for something that had a V12, a Series 2 V12 is a rare beast. They didn't make too many of them, and at the moment they're somewhere between £20,000 and £25,000 at dealers for really good ones. So overall, you can say that none of these are cheap cars anymore. They aren't. They cost a lot of money to buy and a lot of money to run, but they're also one of the most rewarding cars you could ever own. You do get an awful lot of car for your money. I do not want to paint a negative picture. As I always do with all of the cars that we feature on the channel, especially my own, want to give you the highs and the lows and a very realistic approach towards it. Don't be scared by some of the things I've mentioned. They've got to be pointed out, they've got to be addressed, but get a good one of these and you're going to love it. They're really, really great. And this, out of all the cars I've owned, is the only car I've ever bought twice. And it's the only car that I almost say to myself daily that I will never sell. I enjoy just looking at it, let alone driving it. So I would thoroughly recommend one to you, no matter what version you go for. They're all special. And I think it deserves a moment in the spotlight.